Welcome to the agency's tutorial on completing OSHA record-keeping forms. This brief presentation reviews OSHA record-keeping requirements at a high level, with an emphasis on how to fill out the forms provided in OSHA's record-keeping forms package. The tutorial covers what types of operations come under the record-keeping rule and thus are required to complete the forms, what types of injury and illness incidents must be recorded, and what information is to be included in each of the 3 OSHA forms respectively. Who must complete the OSHA injury and illness record-keeping forms? Many, but not all employers, must complete the OSHA injury and illness record-keeping forms on an ongoing basis. Employers with 10 or fewer employees throughout the previous calendar year do not need to complete these forms. Said another way, if there are more than 10 employees at any time during that calendar year, the employer may come under the requirement. When counting employees, you must include full-time, part-time, temporary, and seasonal workers. This exemption is based on the employment of the entire company rather than the establishment. For example, if a company has 2 establishments, one with 5 employees and one with 7 employees, the company must fill out the forms for each establishment because the company employment is greater than 10. In addition to the small employer exemption, there is an exemption for establishments classified in certain industries. For example, the forms do not need to be completed for restaurants, banks, and medical offices. A complete list of exempt industries can be found on this slide by using the Partially Exempt Industries link. Establishments normally exempt from keeping the OSHA forms must complete the forms if they're informed in writing to do so by the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or OSHA. Also, exempt establishments must report to OSHA within 8 hours any work-related fatality. Work-related amputations, inpatient hospitalizations, and the loss of an eye must be reported to OSHA within 24 hours of learning of the incident. These events can be reported by phone to the local OSHA area office or by calling the OSHA 800 number, which is 1-800-321-6742, or by using the reporting application on OSHA's public website. What forms must be completed? There are 3 forms you, the employer, must complete. OSHA Forms 300 and 301 are maintained on an ongoing basis. Recordable injuries and illnesses must be entered on these forms as they occur throughout the year. The OSHA Form 300A is completed after the end of the year, summarizing the number of recordable cases that occurred. Employers may use equivalent forms in place of these forms as long as the equivalent forms contain all of the same data elements and are as easy to read as the OSHA forms. What cases need to be recorded on the forms? Any work-related injury or illness that meets certain severity criteria must be entered on the forms within 7 calendar days of learning about its occurrence. We'll talk about each of these bullet items on the next few slides. What is considered an injury or illness? OSHA defines an injury or illness as an abnormal condition or disorder. Injuries and illnesses include cases such as cuts, fractures, sprains, skin diseases, or respiratory conditions. For OSHA record-keeping purposes, an injury or illness can also consist of only subjective symptoms, such as aches or pain. Exposures that do not result in signs or symptoms are not considered injuries or illnesses and should therefore not be recorded on the OSHA forms. For example, if an employee is exposed to chlorine and does not exhibit any signs or symptoms due to the exposure, the case would not be recorded on the log, even if it involved prophylactic, that is, preventative, medical treatment. What cases are work-related? Cases that are caused, contributed to, or significantly aggravated by events or exposures in the work environment are considered work-related for OSHA record-keeping purposes. Work-relatedness is presumed for injuries and illnesses occurring in the workplace or in locations where the employee is located as a condition of employment. It's important to remember that if work makes any contribution to the injury or illness, it is considered work-related for OSHA record-keeping purposes. There are certain activities that occur in the work environment that OSHA does not consider work-related. For example, injuries resulting directly from eating, drinking, or preparing one's own food at the workplace are not considered work-related. For a complete list of these activities, refer to Section 1904.5b2. What are the severity criteria for recording a work-related injury or illness? Work-related injuries and illnesses that result in death, loss of consciousness, days away from work, restricted work activity, transfer to another job, or medical treatment beyond first aid must be recorded on the OSHA forms. We'll talk about these criteria on the next few slides. For cases involving a fatality, enter a check mark in column G on the OSHA Form 300. Note in column M whether the case involved an injury or an illness. Also remember that you must report the fatality to OSHA within 8 hours of learning of its occurrence. The event can be reported by phone to the local OSHA area office or by using the OSHA 800 number, 1-800-321-6742, or by using the reporting application on OSHA's public website. For cases that involve 1 or more days away from work, you must place a check mark in column H on the OSHA Form 300 and enter the number of calendar days the employee was away from work in column K. Then note in column M whether the case involves an injury or an illness. When counting days, be sure to count the days the employee would not have been able to work, regardless of whether he or she was scheduled to work. This would include weekends and holidays. Do not count the day of the injury. If the day count reaches 180 calendar days, you may stop counting subsequent days and enter 180 in column K. For cases that involve restricted work activity or job transfer, you must place a check mark in column I on the OSHA Form 300 and enter the number of calendar days the employee was restricted in column L. You count the days in the same manner as counting days away from work. Then note in column M whether the case involves an injury or an illness. An employee is considered restricted if he or she is unable to work a full shift or is unable to perform all of the work activities he or she would be expected to do at least once during a week. If a case involves both days away from work and days of restricted work activity, place a check mark in column H, leave column I blank, and enter the correct day counts in both columns K and L. For example, if an employee had 3 days away from work and 2 of restricted work activity, place a check mark in column H and enter a 3 in column K and a 2 in column L. Again, note in column M whether the case involves an injury or an illness. For cases that involve medical treatment beyond first aid, you must place a check mark on the OSHA Form 300 in column J, which is for other recordable cases. Then note in column M whether the case involves an injury or an illness. For OSHA record-keeping purposes, medical treatment is any treatment for an injury or illness except diagnostic procedures, observation and counseling, and first aid. First aid consists of 14 specific treatments listed in Section 1904.7b5 of the regulatory text. It includes items such as non-prescription medication, wound coverings, and hot and cold treatment. You can access the complete list using the regulatory text link or by looking in the Overview section of the Record-Keeping Forms package available on OSHA's record-keeping webpage. Work-related cases of cancer, chronic irreversible disease, fractured or cracked bones or teeth, or a punctured eardrum must be entered on the OSHA forms. These are considered significant injuries and illnesses. The record-keeping rule also contains special criteria for recording occupational hearing loss, tuberculosis, injuries from needle sticks and sharps potentially contaminated with blood-borne pathogens, and cases involving medical removal required by other OSHA standards. For these specific requirements, Refer to sections 1904.8 through 1904.11 using the regulatory text links. You must fill out an injury and illness incident report for every recordable work-related injury or illness, together with the log of work-related injuries and illnesses and the accompanying summary. These forms help the employer and OSHA develop a picture of the extent and severity of work-related incidents. Within 7 calendar days after you receive information that a recordable work-related injury or illness has occurred, you must fill out this form or an equivalent. Some state workers' compensation, insurance, or other reports may be acceptable substitutes. To be considered an equivalent form, any substitute must contain all the information asked for on this form. All establishments covered by Part 1904 must complete the summary of work-related injuries and illnesses, even if no injuries or illnesses occurred during the year. Remember to review the log to verify that the entries are complete and accurate before completing this summary. Using the Form 300, count the individual entries you made for each category. Then write the totals on the left side of the Form 300A, making sure you've added the entries from every page of the log. If you had no cases, write in a 0. On the right side of the Form 300A, fill in the establishment information. Also, in this section of the form, a company official must certify that the entries on the summary are true, accurate, and complete. The certifying official must be the owner of the company, an officer of the corporation, the highest-ranking company official at the establishment, or that person's supervisor. You must post a copy of the annual summary in each establishment in a conspicuous place or places where notices to employees are customarily posted. You must post it no later than February 1st of the year following the year covered by the records, and keep the posting in place for 3 months until April 30th. You must keep these forms on file for 5 years following the year to which they pertain. You must also update the Form 300 with any changes that may occur to the recorded cases during that period. Do not send completed copies of the forms to OSHA. You must make the forms available to employees, former employees, their representatives, and to OSHA officials upon request. Note, however, that both the Log 300 and Form 301 incident reports will include information relating to employee health, and thus can only be used in a manner that protects confidentiality to the extent possible, while promoting occupational safety and health. For details concerning the access provisions, refer to sections 1904.35 and 1904.40. Who must electronically report from 300A data to OSHA? Many, but not all establishments must electronically report data from their completed Form 300A to OSHA. The data must be reported by March 2nd of each year. Establishments with 20 to 249 employees classified in certain industries must report these data. A complete list of covered industries for this establishment size class is found on this slide by using the Certain Industries link. In addition, establishments with 250 or more employees required to keep OSHA injury and illness records must also report these data. In other words, not all establishments are subject to this reporting requirement. Establishments with a peak employment of 19 or fewer during the previous calendar year do not need to report, regardless of the establishment's industry. Establishments with 20 or more employees do not need to report their data if they are not in a covered industry. The electronic reporting requirements are based on the size and industry of the establishment, not the firm as a whole. A firm may be composed of 1 or more establishments. To determine if you need to provide OSHA with the required data for an establishment, you need to determine the industry and peak employment of the establishment. For example, if a company has 2 manufacturing establishments, one with 17 employees and one with 25 employees, the company only needs to report the Form 300A data for the establishment with 25 employees. While manufacturing is a covered industry, establishments with fewer than 20 employees are not required to report their Form 300A data. OSHA provides a secure website, the Injury Tracking Application, or ITA, where employers create an account and enter and submit their data. Information about the reporting requirements and access to the ITA can be found at the ITA launch page. In conclusion, this presentation reviewed OSHA's injury and illness record-keeping requirements at a very high level. The record-keeping page, however, includes links to reference documents that address the specific requirements of the record-keeping rule and answer many recurring questions, as well as a link to the record-keeping forms package itself. To learn the details of what you need to do to comply with the record-keeping rule, you can review the regulatory text, frequently asked questions or FAQs, and the letters of interpretation linked from the record-keeping page. If you have specific questions that you cannot find direct guidance for in these documents, you may try the record-keeping Q&A search application. Also, feel free to call your local OSHA office or submit your question to OSHA using the Contact Us link. Thanks for helping to make the nation's workplaces safer.